Well, y'all are probably wondering where Kirkwood is. I talked to him last night, or yesterday afternoon late, and he said that he was certain that they would have a baby last night. Well, I talked to him again this morning, and he said, I am certain that we will have a baby today. And they're having the baby at home. Now, Jeff, I told you we needed to get that boy insurance. So, no, they've chosen to do that. My thing is, I think we all ought to get together after church and go hang out in their front yard this afternoon. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here. Had a great time. Last thing I told you is I was going to land in Zurich, Switzerland, and I was going to go, if at all possible, to the Grossmünster, which means great church in the High German that the Swiss speak. And so I did. I went to see, and by the way, I was reading, if you're looking for a good book, this is God's Armed Prophet, Zwingli. Fascinating book on his life. I went to the church that he pastored. It started the Swiss Reformation. Almost at the exact same time hang on to that picture right there, and I'm going to come to it. Almost at the exact same time that Luther started the German Reformation. And they did it independently of each other. In fact, by the way, Luther and Zwingli never got along. Zwingli tried to get along with Luther, but Luther had too much Baptist in him. But anyway, so I went there, got there, bribed the driver to take me there, and got over to see Zwingli's church, where so much of what you and I hold dearly to today really began to be taught in that place. Then I ended up in Amsterdam. Now, I don't tell my wife all these things, but I have them secretly tucked away in my heart. I got her up the other morning. I said, you're not going to believe what I'm going to show you today. And she started out and she said, oh no. So I took her past. This is the old Mennonite church in Amsterdam. And not far from this place, I couldn't exactly pinpoint it. Nobody really today knows, but there used to be in the 1600s what was called the Dutch Waterlanders Mennonite gathering house. They gathered in a bakery. They were bakers. They were the direct descendants of the Anabaptists. Menno Simons was an Anabaptist, and the Mennonites get their name from Menno Simons. They were here in a church somewhere in this area in Amsterdam. When all of this persecution against the separatists and the nonconformists in England broke out, and there was a small group from Gainesville in England. They left England in 1608 and went to Amsterdam because they would give them freedom of religion there. That was made up of a preacher by the name of John Smythe and a lawyer who helped the church by the name of Thomas Helwys. They went there, and the Anabaptists here influenced them to the point to where they all took believers' baptism from these Anabaptist descendants. They were baptized there as a church. Persecution broke out there. They started killing the Anabaptists. They started killing the Baptists when they could get their hands on them. That little group of Baptists from Thomas Helwys came back to England, back to the same area. And eventually, those Baptists there got on a boat to come to America, and the boat was called the Mayflower. Now, we had our forefathers were killed, drowned, persecuted, and Zwingli did a great deal of that persecution of the Anabaptists in Switzerland. At the end of this book, he just comes to the final conclusion in his own life, just kill the Anabaptists. Just kill him. And of course, he dies in battle fighting the Catholics. So the Catholics and the Protestants just had one thing that they could agree on. Let's us all just go kill the Anabaptists. We're the result of what the Anabaptists did and went through here in this country. Now, I give you a lot of that because if you enjoy religious liberty, you have to go back and thank an Anabaptist for that. Because so many of them were persecuted and killed that they wanted nothing to do. Your forefathers, our forefathers in this country, were heavily influenced by the fact we do not want a government with its hand in the church. And so they came here, a lot of them out of just that kind of persecution, trying to say, let the church be the church. You tend to the government, let the church be the church. Hitler's idea was just the opposite of that. He answered Niemöller and said, listen, you go tend to the church and I'll take care of the people. And Niemöller said the church is the people. And so our founding fathers said we don't want a church that constantly has its hands in the church. But our founding fathers were wise enough, like Benjamin Rush and even the deists, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, and the believer, George Washington, who had enough foresight to say, but the government cannot be without the voice of the church. You doubt me, I can prove everything I'm saying to you. The church has to be able to give word to the government, but we do not want a government that is constantly interfering in the church. And so in our day, when it comes down to, oh, you should never talk about this or say that or anything like that, because you're never supposed to say anything about the government, you better hope to God in heaven there's a pastor left that will say something about the government in the pulpit. That's about as weak as we are Christians in this society. We ought to be cheering at this point. And the only thing I can tell you is this: you need to take the Word of God and put your own personal opinion aside and sit down and you let the dictates of the Word of God direct you in this election. So now, I've said it and I don't take it back. Anyway, now let's get to this. Let me take you now to the 41st chapter of Genesis. And let me just remind you, we're moving toward a few very important. Next Sunday is very important. Well, it's very important in a number of ways. We just need to gather and pray for our country next Sunday. But next Sunday, I'm going to share with you what was handed out to you, or what will be handed out to you in your small groups this morning, in your life groups this morning. And that is the Joseph Project, and that's kind of what I'm leading into. Next Sunday, I'm going to explain and walk you through that entire book. We'll be able to go through it and look at it and be challenged by it and be prepared to come back on the 17th and pledge what we are going to do for the next 2 years ahead and what God is calling us to do, and preparing our first fruits by the end of this year to give as good an offering as we can. And I'll talk more about that in the next couple of Sundays. But I want to draw your attention back now, and I'm going to ease into that and set next Sunday up to Genesis chapter 41. Because in Genesis chapter 41, you come to what we've all been waiting for in the life of Joseph, and that is for him to get out of prison. For him to get out of this dungeon that he's been in. And in Genesis 41, verse 1, it happened at the end of 2 full years. At the end of 2 full years. Now, 2 full years separate chapter 40 from chapter 41. Because at the end of chapter 40, verse 23, we read these words: the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Literally, it means to put him out of your mind. Not interested enough to think about it, not concerned enough to keep this in my mind. It just is out of my mind. Not anything important to me. And Joseph had told him a little bit of his life story. If you remember in chapter 40 and verse 15, he says, I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, my homeland, and even here I've done nothing that should have put me in the dungeon. Just do me a kindness, remember me. I've been kind to you, remember me when you get to Pharaoh, and just give him my story. Just tell him the little bit that I've told you. But he walks out of there and he forgets it. Now, there's a lot in life we forget. In fact, there's a fascinating study that was done by Karen Bola who talked about the top 6 things that we forget. So let me start with number 6. We forget faces. 42% of the time, we just forget people's faces. We'll see them again, but we won't remember them. Number 5, we forget what was said 49% of the time. I really think that's 99% of the time we forget what people said. Number 4, words. We forget words 53% of the time. I'll oftentimes read through a book and will underline words that I don't know and then look them up and try to put them into my vocabulary, but it's kind of hard to do. We just forget those words. Most of us, 53% forget them. Number 3, we forget telephone numbers. 57% of us. That's almost 100% now. I don't have to remember a number. I couldn't tell you my kids' numbers. I think I do know Debbie's, but 57% of us forget phone numbers. Number 2, we forget where something is. 60% of us. What's the number one thing we forget? Names. 83% of the time, we're going to forget somebody's name. Thank you, Jane, for saying that. Oh, Kathy, I'm sorry. Was that not you? It was Brenda over there. Okay. I was just joking. Anyway, we forget names. Now, it's one thing to forget things. It's something else to be forgotten. When somebody just writes you off and forgets you, well, that's where Joseph was until you get to verse 1 of chapter 41. And when you get here, what I want you to see this morning is this. I want you to see how the glory of God shows up and shines in the details of life. In the very details of your life, God's glory shows up. You'll be able to look back over your life and see moments and glimpses of the glory of God and the things that He's done. I was talking to Mike this morning early when he came by to pray for me. He mentioned something to me, and I talked about how I can look at the last 6 years plus here at Valleydale. I can just see over and over the glimpses of God and what He did 6.5 years ago, 7 years ago, what He was doing in my life. Now, when I was going through it, I could not. But once I got to this place, and especially now, looking back, I can take you back and show you marvelous glimpses of God's glory in what He was doing in a very dark and difficult time in my life. Now, that's what I want you to keep in the back of your mind, because that's exactly what you're going to see in the life of Joseph. And I'm just going to show you 2 things this morning as he comes to interpret this dream. And the first thing is this, is you're going to see God's glory. His glory shows up in the details, listen, in the details of man's thought process. In the subconscious, in the unconscious part of man's mind. Now, let me say this before I get started. Earlier this week, several mornings a week, I was up about 4:30 on the back of a boat with my Bible, with a legal pad and a pencil, and a couple of things of commentaries. Nobody there, with a cup of coffee. And God just seemed to reach down and pull back for me what I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to share with you something I've never thought of before, and I don't know if you've ever thought of it before, but I'm going to show you what I think God is doing in the midst of all this, because you're going to come to yet another 2 dreams. By the way, There are 3 pairs of dreams in Joseph's story. 3 pairs of dreams, 2 each, 6 different dreams. There were the 2 dreams that Joseph had that we were introduced. That's how we were introduced to him. The 2 dreams that he had. There's the dream of the cupbearer, and then the dream of the baker. And then you're going to come to 2 dreams of Pharaoh. Now, it's kind of fascinating to me because what you have is you have 3 sets of 2. 6 different dreams given to 4 different people over a period of 13 years. Now, have you gotten all of that? Does that stand out in your mind? Because let me tell you, it becomes pretty fascinating to me. Well, here's Pharaoh. In verse 1, it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile, and lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they gazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows, now if this sounds like a Chick-fil-A commercial gone bad. What you have got is you have got cannibalistic cows, or cowbalistic. If there is such a word as a cow eating another cow, it's cannibalism in my book, but that's what happens here. 7 others of these cows came up. They're ugly, they're gaunt. They stood by the other cows on the bank, and the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke, and he falls back asleep again. And he dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain come up on a single stalk, plump and good, fat. They're healthy looking. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears ate up, swallowed up. This is grain with teeth. This sounds like the wheat that ate Iowa or something. You know, the old frightful movie, the blob that ate Minnesota. This is grains of wheat eating other grains of wheat. 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after him, and the ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was all a dream. And he panics. He goes into a panic, and the word panic there, and it troubled him. He not only panics, but it goes on to say that in the morning his spirit was troubled. The Hebrew word for troubled is a word called poam, and it means to be stabbed or to be something to be thrust into you or to be pounded. So what it is saying here is that emotionally and mentally, this was just beating on him. He was just constantly being stabbed by this dream. What does it mean? What does it mean? What is this? I can make no sense out of it. And he could not think of anything else because he was constantly thinking about this dream. And so as he thinks about this dream, he calls in all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. They don't know any way to interpret that. And the chief cupbearer, by the way, let me tell you, I could take you to Daniel chapter 2 where Nebuchadnezzar has his dream of this great statue, and he will not tell the Chaldeans the dream. He tells the Chaldeans, you tell me what I dreamed. And then I'll believe your interpretation when you tell me what I dreamed. Now, Scripture kind of alludes that he couldn't remember it all, which is true. I dream a fair amount, and when I wake up, I can never remember a whole lot about what I dreamed. But I can remember the emotion that I was experiencing at the time. If it was something frightening, I still remember it was something very troubling, even though I can't remember what the dream was. Probably my mama spanking me. I've never gotten over that. I need help. Anyway, that's what he does. He comes and he's going to tell the dream. But he tells the dream and nobody can interpret. And the chief cupbearer, verse 9, spoke to Pharaoh saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. I've got to tell you of something that I did some time back. Pharaoh was furious with his servants. He put me in the confinement in the house of the captain of the body. That's Potiphar's jail, his prison. Both me and the chief baker, and we had a dream on the same night. He and I, each of us, dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now, a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard. He knew him to be the slave of Pharaoh, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He said exactly what he told us would happen, happened. He told us what our dreams were. He interpreted our dreams. So now what I want to impress on you is this. I want to go back and tell you, you've got Joseph who's having two dreams in what we've read thus far. You've got the cupbearer having a dream one night, and in the same night, the baker having a dream in the same night. And it both spoke of their future. Joseph's dreams had spoken about his future, and now Pharaoh has two dreams, and we know the story. It's speaking about the future as well. So what you've got is you've got these 6 dreams by 4 different people over a period of 13 years apart. And God takes all 6 of these dreams from these 4 different men over this period of 13 years. And do you know what he's doing? He has implanted the dream in their subconscious mind in the deepest part of sleep. And he now weaves it all together in time, pulling all these threads and all these ideas and all these people together to end him up precisely before Pharaoh in the exact moment God wanted him there and that he was needed. You think God can take care of the details of your life? When he is working on that minute a level in the subconscious mind of 4 different men over a period of 13 years, our God's glory shows up in the details. And you say, well, I always heard that it was the devil that was in the detail. I've always heard that too. I don't like details. That's why we have Jeff McCukin. I don't like details. That's why I married Deborah DeVore. I can't deal with detail. I'm not interested in details. I'm interested in the bigger picture. I'm interested more in the verb tense of a Greek verb than I am in the details of the finances of this church. That's just not my gift. It's not my area. For 13 years, God's been preparing this boy to do this, to interpret these things and to see the majestic glory of God in the details. Now, I have to be honest with you, in flying back yesterday, I had unlimited amount of time. Nobody came and knocked on the door. No telephone was ringing for me. And I sat there and I just spent 9 hours immersed in a lot of this. And I thought to myself, what can I give as an illustration of all of the work and the detail? And I'm flying out of Europe, and I thought to myself, it has to be the invasion on D-Day, June 6, 1944, all the planning that went into moving 1 million men. 175,000 they started off with, the Brits, Americans, Scots, Canadians, some Polish, and a few of the Free French. That morning of June the 6th. All of the details, all of the things, the communication, the movement of equipment, 1 million men eventually. That day they were putting and moving 350,000 airmen, seamen, and those in the army into building a new front wall against Nazism and having to face the fortifications of one of the greatest military minds in history, Erwin Rommel. Who planned all of that? If you read any history behind the scenes, you've got FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, who wants a direct line to Berlin. Churchill is in disagreement, and he continues to speak of the soft underbelly of Europe. He wants to come up through Italy and through Greece and to come up that way. You've got the differences between these two leaders, and make no mistake about it, they were the two. Then throw into that the paranoid, schizophrenic Joseph Stalin, who is pounding on them to make an invasion, constantly pounding on them to make an invasion. And then you come up with all the various personalities under that, with a Dwight David Eisenhower. And then you've got Montgomery, the field marshal, the British field marshal, Montgomery of Alamein, and the differences there, and all of the generals there. And then you've got to throw in George Patton, who's got his own idea of what to do. Have I exhausted y'all with that? Because that's what I'm trying to do, is to show you how do you move a massive army like that. It takes years of decision making. It takes thousands of people to make detailed instructions. They studied terrain, they studied moon phases, they studied tides, they studied the movement of storms in and out of Europe. All of these things, all of these details went into that. And yet not a single one of them knew the future. Not a single one of them knew the next hour. Not a single one of them could get in the mind of anyone else. And yet you and I serve a God who not only knows the future, but is there in the future and is so sovereign that he is able to walk in to the subconscious mind of anybody he chooses. Now that's detail. To begin to stop and think what God was doing in all of this, God says, look at how I handle all of these things in all of these minds over this period of time, and it comes out just like I asked for it to at this moment. That's amazing. Y'all just sit there. I thought that was amazing. It is an amazing thought that God handles that kind of detail. We never even think of those things. And yet in the midst of all of this, God, we worry and we fret and we carry on about the details of life. I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. I don't know what's going to happen in this election. I don't know if we're going to go into a stock market spiral down. I don't know if we're going to lose jobs. I don't know if we're going to have a worldwide recession. I don't know what that crazy guy in Russia is going to do. And we don't know what's going to be the outcome of all of this stuff in the Middle East. Well, let me tell you something. While we're all wrapped up in what people are doing, I can assure you this: God's glory is in the details. Well, let me give you the second thing. And the second thing in all of this is that you get a glimpse of the glory of God in the compassion he has for mankind. Now, this is fascinating too. So let me pick it up now in verse 14. Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. Look at the verbs in this verse, by the way. I won't have time to say anything about them. It's just like hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon, called for Joseph, hurriedly brought, when he had shaved himself, changed his clothes. I mean, it's just one verb after another after another. Pharaoh said to Joseph, by the way, that's an interesting thing. He shaves because the Egyptians shaved every morning. All of the priests of On would shave every single morning. Pharaoh would be shaved. They shaved their heads. They shaved the hair off of their body. They certainly shaved their faces. They were completely shaven. And here come the Hebrews who look like Civil War reenactors. They've got beards down to here, and full of all this hair. Well, they shave him and they bring him in there before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph then answered Pharaoh saying, now what he does here is kind of interesting to me because he responds. It's almost like a high-pitched emotional response. So when you read this, you've got to think of it in that way. He says, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. All of this is about Joseph. And so Joseph responds with one single Hebrew word. Valleydale. Valleydale, not in me. Stop looking in me. Stop looking. This is not in me. This is not an ability that I have. This isn't a trick. This isn't some kind of something that I'm able to work out and work through and figure out in my life. Not in me. Just one word, one statement. Valleydale. It's not me. Look at the witness that he is immediately to Pharaoh. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. You can't look at me, Pharaoh, and expect me to solve this issue for you, but now he comes. And the fascinating thing to me is this, is that if right now the Yankees walked into this place and said, we've heard you used to could pitch fairly well. You're coming to New York with us. You're going to suit up tonight and you're going to play. You're going to tell us about how we should be pitching to these guys over here, and you're going to give us some instruction. You know what I do all of a sudden? Sure, let's go. Come on, I can do that. I can tell you which pitch to throw to this guy. I can do that. Well, you don't find that cockiness in Joseph. He's not attracted and lured by all of this being cleaned up and shaven and the palace and all the accoutrements that went with being an Oriental monarch like Pharaoh was. All of the gold, all of the silver, all of the things that were there in that palace. He's saying, man, don't look at me. Don't put your trust in me. Don't put your faith in me. I tell you that as a pastor all the time. You should not put your faith and trust in me as a pastor. You should put your faith and trust in the Lord, and let's walk this thing together. So that's what he's saying here. He's saying, you look to God. You look to the Lord. You watch him. Let's see. God's the one who's going to give you the answer. So Pharaoh said, okay, all right. Here's my dream. In my dream, behold, I was standing by the bank of the Nile. And we're going to go through it again. Why? Because it's here twice. And behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile. Now, let me tell you, there's about 5 or 6 times he uses that word behold. The number 7 just constantly keeps coming up. You say, well, what does all that mean? I don't know. I'm just telling you what's here. I was standing, behold, I was standing. In other words, the word behold is so important in Hebrew and Greek because it means stop now and listen to this really well. Look at this. Think about this. I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile. They grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly, gaunt, as I had never seen for the ugliness in all the land of Egypt. It gets a little bit more intense. These are the ugliest cows I've ever laid eyes on. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. You know what that means? It means that I've been on 2 weeks in Europe eating chocolate every day, and I came home and I didn't gain 1 pound. That's essentially what it's saying. Plus, I'm very thankful. You couldn't tell that they had eaten. You couldn't tell that they had had anything. I saw also in my dream 7 ears full and good, and they came up on a single stalk. Just a stalk brought all this fruit up, and lo, 7 ears withered, thin, scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians. There was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God had told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Now, he has just spoken to a pagan, non-believing political leader. Can God do that? Go read Isaiah 45. He speaks to Cyrus, the old pagan. You say, well, why does God do that? Because God's God. Just hold on to it all. He gives this all to Pharaoh. God uses the dreams like a movie projector for Joseph to watch. He says the 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. He did that to Nebuchadnezzar. He did that to Cyrus. He did that to Pharaoh. God can listen, let me go back to a quote, and I think the quote goes back to Luther, but it certainly goes back to a good friend of mine, Erwin Lutzer, who said, even the devil is God's devil. Our God is sovereign over everything. Everything. And he can put into the mind, you think kings and presidents and prime ministers make history. They do not. God makes history, and he causes presidents to just be a part of what he's doing. That's why as Christians, we should be the calmest people in this nation and in this world. Whatever happens, number one, we'll deserve. Number two, whatever happens, God has allowed it. Y'all not very, well, anyway, okay. What were we doing? Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land, verse 29. Now watch this, because he's going to divide this into 2 parts. There's going to be a severity, and then he's going to show you a personality in all of this. The severity is going to be greater than the abundance. After them, 7 years of famine will come. Now, he's going to give you about 5 statements here that will tell you the severity of this famine. All the abundance will be forgotten. Now, what do you normally remember? The good times. The good times. Oh, I remember this. Even when times were bad, we remember the good times. But he says, this is going to be so bad that you will not remember anything that was good. The abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land, so that the abundance will be unknown in the land. All the 7 years of tremendous, unbelievable abundance will be forgotten because of the subsequent famine. It will be very severe. This is going to be bad. It's going to be the worst thing they had ever seen in their lives. They will never have experienced anything like this before. There's going to be abundance, yes, but you'll never remember the abundance because the scarcity will be so great. Now, look at the personality here. He turns now from the severity to the personality. Now, verse 32, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, now watch this. You come to this, it is the determination of God. Here's the personality is God. It means that the matter is determined by God. God has determined it. I just told you, pharaohs and presidents and prime ministers, kings, they don't make history. We think they do, but they don't. God's personality. Now I'm going to Well, I don't have time to do it. But now watch the second thing, and the second thing is this, the consummation. He will bring it about quickly. This is going to happen, and it's about to happen. It's about to start right now. Then Joseph gives Pharaoh this whole plan of what to do. Joseph doesn't have to go pray about it. He doesn't say, hey, give me a couple of days and let the Spirit move on my spirit. He doesn't have to go and talk to the Lord about it. God's prepared him for 13 years. God's been working in his life so that he can see something like this and know immediately what God would do. And so he comes and he says, let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact a fifth of the produce, 20% of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming up and store them. There are remains that they have excavated of storehouse cities, cities that were nothing but used for storehouses in Egypt. They talk about them. They'll take you there and show it to you. Let them be these cities, places where we store all of this. Let the food become as reserved for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. And the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. Now, what I want to tell you is this, is that God gives a plan to his man for the care of the people. And I don't have time because I'm already past my time. I wanted to go back and show you all of this. During those 7 years of plenty, verse 47 of chapter 41, the land brought forth. He gathered all of the food through those 7 years. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, verse 49, like the sand of sea, until he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. He is a forget, guys, measuring this stuff. We've got so much now we don't know what to do with. Don't measure it anymore. We don't have numbers high enough. God's in the details. And he's in the details, and let me just get to what I want to tell you on this. He puts Joseph in this place through all that he goes through. And in the details, God has him there, not just to save the Egyptians, but certainly to save them. And not just to save the Jews, but certainly to save them. What you're going to get to in all of this is in verse 52 of chapter 41, the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the earth. Now, do you say, is that in the entire earth, all the way over here in America? You have to understand when Scripture is using a type of literature. He's not talking literally about, no, the American Indians did not get in canoes and come across all the way over to the Middle East to get grain. That's not what he's saying. He's talking about the world that they knew, the then known world at that time. In other words, people other than Egyptians and Jews, Africans, Arabians, as we would call, or Persians, Arabians, Arabs, people from the north, people from the south, the east, the west, from around the Mediterranean world, even those that we would consider European, maybe those we would consider Indo-European or Indo-Eurasian. They come. Why? You see the glory of God in his compassion for all people. God loves all people. God longs to save all people and will save those out of every tribe and nation and tongue and people on the face of this earth. That's his great design and desire. That's his compassion for the people who were not just Egyptians and not just Jews. Now let's run that on up thousands of years to today. To what about this church? And what are we to do? This is the Joseph Project. And that is, God has called us. And this church has a niche for training and discipling and building into the lives of people. We can only do it so much with what we have. So that you and I, and personally I think every church is called to be more concerned about the generation yet to come than those of us who are just sitting here now. So that in the years to come, there's going to be a couple that will walk through the doors of this church whose marriage is in serious trouble, and they're going to come in and they're going to wonder, is anybody got an answer for what the two of us are going through? And can anybody walk with us? And is there a God who loves us and can patch this stuff up and put us back together? Somebody's going to walk in here, and that's going to be their heart. There's going to be a family that'll walk in here one day. A husband and a wife with a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old and maybe one that is on the way. And that couple is going to be looking for a church that will walk with them and their little family, not just for 3 or 4 years, but for the decades to come, so that they will not only see their children grow up in this place, but they will watch their children married in this place and their grandchildren born in this place and dedicated in this place, so that there will be 2 and 3 and maybe even 4 generations born into the family of God through the ministry of Valleydale Church. One day there's going to be a teenager who will walk into this place who's hurting and lonely and feels left out and outside and wondering, is there anything to the love of God for him? And here he will hear the gospel. He will find those that will love him and walk with him and care for him, so that one day he will grow up and he will surrender his life to take the same gospel to somebody that is halfway around the world as God calls him to missions. That's what we're being called to do. To love people that are not yet here. Some not even yet born. Some that are not even yet saved. Just as Joseph was enacting the plan of God, because in the details God shows the glory of his compassion for people who were not yet there in Egypt to get food and to live. Let's stand and pray about it.